What is up, people of the internet? It is Dave. It is Duncan back from Metal Epidemic with another album review. And for this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from Swiss Avant-Garde metal band Zeal Ardor. The band's new album GREIF will be released on August 23rd. Inventive and iconoclastic, Zeal Ardor isn't just a band, it's a living and breathing entity. Like any other sentient being, it consumes, evolves, and transforms from one season to the next. Its shape may change through its spirit, though its spirit remains the same. Founded and fronted by Manuel Gagno, I'm not sure how you pronounce his surname, sorry. It has only sharpened its claws, lengthened its teeth, and steeled its nerves over the years, growing more undeniable and unpredictable in the process. The title GREIF is inspired by an annual tradition in Manuel's hometown of Basel, Switzerland. A mythical hybrid creature parades through the streets for the children in symbolism of Basel's working people balking at the oppressive elite on its other side. Given the animal's amalgam of energies and physicality, the name provide a purpose. The GREIF is a lion, a snake, and a bird, he notes. During the parade, he turns his backside to the aristocrats and sticks it to the man. It reflects where we are. The frontman excitedly leveraged the talents of his cohorts, featuring 3 voices for the first time and emboldening the sound from every angle. I wanted to expand upon what we had and introduce new colours. Manuel goes on, there are angry and accusatory moments, but there's also some solace and happiness. I'm widening the palette of colours to have paint with. These are avenues we haven't tried. Decamping to vocalist Mark Oberst's studio Hutch Sounds in Switzerland to record once again, the album came to life in just 5 months. The album was then mixed by Adrian Bushby, who was previously worked with the Foo Fighters, The Darkness, and the Spice Girls. Zeal Ardor, Duncan.
I'll tell you what I want. What I really, really want is a new Zeal Ardor album.
That was genius.
You set me up.
I did. So we've obviously been checking out these singles as they've been released. I think we did 4 reaction videos.
I believe the term we would use is perplexed.
Yes, very much so.
And I love that because they've done the old. We're just picking. And I will stress this right now. What they've picked now in the context of the album is not what I would have released as singles. But I also think that having listened to them all, they give you a really good grounding as to the switches and changes of the album as a whole.
Yeah.
Minus one element, which we'll get to in a minute.
Okay. So what did you think? What did you make of GREIF by Zeal Ardor?
So, big Zeal Ardor fan, right? Got to stress that. I was an early adopter of the old Devil Is Fine back in 2017. I fucking loved that album. And it was a persuasion that I wouldn't... It was a flavour that I wasn't necessarily a fan of, specifically in the blackened style. I've... As a gimmick band, and ostensibly their sound is a gimmick sound, and I think once you understand the early juxtaposition is born out of an internet question. What should I write as avant-garde experimental pop musician? What should I take a stab at? And the internet being the internet, as classy as it is, was like slave sounds and black metal, and any other musician would have been like that. Fuck that. But not Manuel. He went away and crafted something which, under the term Zeal Ardor, is very different from the original release. So they have like a pre-album, which is, don't know if it's considered canon, which is very experimental, very pop, with elements of metal, but not really, that's not the thrust. Devil Is Fine is the first album, and it kind of toes that formula really, really, really well. Of, it is like 50% black metal, 50% what could be attributed as American slavery black sounds. So, and meshed them together. You then got Stranger Fruit, which was the second album, which was much more accomplished, a little bit more ambitious. The focus weirdly was on more of the hooks. There's like songs on that like really have a refined sense of chorus. Also, it was heavier, which was quite surprising. I saw him live on that tour, played Glasgow at Tuts. It was fucking incredible. Full band as well, it just worked for me. Then followed that up with, and this is in the life cycle of our recordings now, self-titled Zeal Ardor, which I thought was a hugely ambitious project, but hugely ambitious in that the scope of the sound was much more polished, much more refined. It didn't take necessarily as many risks as the previous stuff, and some of those rougher edges had been shaved off. So it maybe wasn't as heavy as the previous stuff, but those blackened elements were still very much at the core of what he was doing. And there was a heavier introduction of the kind of gospel singing sound, which had always been there, but it was more prominent. I really liked it. It's an album I still go back to from time to time. It's not my favourite Zeal Ardor, but I think it is probably his most accomplished to date before we get into GREIF or GREIF or however I pronounce it. GREIF. And Jeff. My name is Jeff. So approaching this one, we'd done the singles like you say, and he'd released the last song first, which was like was ostensibly a ballad. And we were like, okay. And then he followed it up with Clawing Out, which was the self-described as a song that plays with polyrhythms and is difficult to follow. And we were listening and we were like, okay. Yeah. Followed that up with, I think it was Hide and Shade, might have been the third one, which had those elements of what we would class as typical Zeal Ardor sound, but they'd inverted it, so the blasting wasn't, it was done cleanly. So we got to the end of that and we were like, okay, because there's a pattern going here. And then I think the final single we checked out was Fend You Off, which was once again sounded like Zeal Ardor, but not as you remember it. And we got to the end of that and we were like, fine, geeze the album. And they have now geezed us that album. I will say this about this album. Upon first listen, when I got to the end, I was like, lots of ideas here. We're switching up quite a bit. I don't like the flow of the album, but I love the ambition. Full stop. Close the book. Put it on the shelf. Case closed, book 'em, Dano. Right? That's kind of where I landed.
Yeah.
I've listened to it a few times since then. I kind of turned on a lot of my original views about the album flow. I actually think it flows a lot better than my first listen. I think once again it was that kind of trying to piece together what the flow was more than anything else. I've listened to this 5 times, and that's saying a lot. It's a stream as well. I hate streams, but I've listened to it 5 times as a stream, and I've come to the consensus that I think this might be the best thing the band's put out. I think overall, I think musically they're doing stuff that I think they've now kind of grown into, which was ideas that weren't fully formed and fleshed out in the previous release, and that's maybe why I wasn't like hugely critical, but I did knock it down a few points for like, this feels a little bit safe. I don't think it was necessarily safe. I think they were experimenting with a push towards something with a more commercial hook. Which is very much a huge flow of this album is aimed at you will sing the chorus, or you will sing the backing vocal, or you will sing the melody of what the guitar's doing, and be prepared at the end of the first listen for it to be in there. So let's break it down, right? Like the tracks in between the singles are actually the exciting bit on subsequent listens. On the first listen, because I'd heard them, I was like, right, that kind of feels like that's very similar, either too similar to the track that follows, or too different after the fact.
Yeah.
So it opens with a kind of introductory track, The Bird, the Lion, the Wildkin, or Wildkin. That is essentially it's an intro, but it's an intro with vocals and build up and all the rest. It's a contextual track because there's elements and motifs of that are used later on the album. Fend You Off, we already knew what that was. That was the first single. It's a Zeal Ardor like masterclass in building up layers. We're going to be talking about layers, and we're going to be talking about 9 Inch Nails. Strap yourselves in. It was all about building up layers and texture and those melodies. And like those two tracks, upon first listening together, I kind of felt like, well, they're kind of similar. Like they're maybe a little bit too similar. It's fine if you have an instrumental opening track and then you go into it, but even vocally, it was kind of similar across the two. Kilonova is the first track to me that I was like, here we fucking go. It is a track that like delivers the new Zeal Ardor. Dare I say that? Dare I go as far as to say a new sound? It isn't necessarily breaking any walls down, but to me, this was the first like full grasp of right. This is a band that are gonna. They're using the 9 Inch Nails technique. They're using it's an industrial style approach where you get like almost a minimalist entry with the first verse, big chorus. Second verse kicks in. We've now got more stuff. Second chorus sounds bigger. Whatever the interlude is, you're going to get that. And by the time you jump into that last one, it's like kitchen sink and all the rest. Manuel's really got like a full-on like grasp of what his vocals can do on this album. He will sit like in a low register, even though like my inclination would be to belt out some of this. He'll just happily just sit and just let that become part of the instrumentation building through. It's a great song. I actually loved it. I loved it because the vocal melody becomes like almost what a guitar would do. Like uses of da 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 da. Like he's singing these parts in there, and the guitar's just sticking in the root. Like no, the guitar would generally do that, and they really go out their way to switch things up. It's the sort of thing that comes with a guy who is a multi-instrumentalist.
Yeah,
Trent Reznor, and someone that's comfortable with experimenting with Sims.
Yeah.
So it comes out of that one, and that one is a little bit more metally. And you're thinking, right, we're building up here, right? And then you get You're Not the Only One Now, which is this really somber, could have been a closing song on any other fucking release.
Yeah.
It's a beautifully haunting, very delicate, very precise, wonderfully dark song. It's hauntingly beautiful. Once again, kind of almost lullaby use of the melody. Like, so he's not singing; he's actually just doing la 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 la. Like there's actual singing of consonant sounds and not necessarily like actual lyrics. Fucking loved it, right? But I was kind of like, on my first listen, I was like, we're slowing the gears down pretty quick here. Subsequent listens, I love it, right? Because to me, it once again feels like it feels like the album's like telling a story, and this is just the close of that chapter. We then carry on through the album into Go Home My Friend, which is the next track, which is really kind of like The Bird, The Lion and The Wildkin. It's a shorter track, is essentially the kickoff of the next phase of the album. But it's now traditional Zeal Ardor. It's the the claps, the kind of backing, almost like gospel style chants, the build up, and we're getting ready to move into Clawing Out, which we've reviewed before. It's maybe not as complicated as the band thinks it is, or the PR says it is. It really isn't. A lot of it is ostensibly in 4/4, but what they do is they start playing on the off time, they speed things up, slow things down.
Yeah.
And I love that about it. Like, the first time I listened to it, I was like, why would you ever release that as a single? Like, I don't get it. On subsequent listens, I've actually found that it's surprisingly clever. The placement on the album is perfect for me, because it comes out of that kind of, you've got the traditional Zeal Ardor sound, and then you move into something that is picking up pace. It even starts using those electronic elements towards the end, which become more prevalent in this part of the album. So you get more of the kind of weird dissonant synth sound that comes in. It's an interesting track. It really, really is. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. I understand that. But by God, do we get like sexy and 9 Inch Nails-tastic right in the disease. This is a big old, like, I have never like wanted someone just to do like a kind of like a David Bowie 70s inspired fucking rock album. But this is it here. Like, You have it's very stripped in, very bass driven. The guitar's ostensibly playing lead stuff as opposed to chords. Disease is something that caught me completely off guard, and I kind of felt to myself, right, this is a flex here. Like from a band point of view, it's fucking awesome. It's totally my jam. I grew up listening to David Bowie. I love those bits when Nine Inch Nails, specifically Nine Inch Nails, but like 90s era Marilyn Manson would start bringing those big kind of 70s rock licks. And I'm thinking about even from Portrait of American Family, even through to things like Mechanical Animals. This kind of sits in that cadence. It works really, really well. Loved it. You then go into 369, which is, I mean, the close of a chapter, maybe. It's the one that kind of goes back into like a big old stomp, big old chant. It's all about the left-hand path, which is satanic as fuck. Love it. Get the references. Dig it. And then you go into, which is really a kind of a group of sections here on the back half. So Thrill is kind of industrial new metal. It's the only way I can describe it. It's like a Static X riff. Once again, shouldn't work in their sound. Fucking love it. It adds something heavier. It's very simplistic compared to the rest on there, but it really, really works. Un Veil Vidi is the classic Zeal Ardor, fully instrumental, fully synth-based interlude track. Oh, mate, I fucking hairs on my back of my neck every time I listen to it. The chord progression is fucking sublime. You get Sugarcoat, which, to me, why is this not a single? This is like, it starts off feeling like it's like the bass tone could be something from Anima by Tool. But it's this like fucking hooky chorus, once again, kind of 70s kind of like lead work on the guitar. Love it. Very, very catchy chorus. Solace is probably the hidden gem on this album, like overall. Big moody piece. I was going to say long form, it's laboured, and I kind of love the way it builds. I think the chorus is great. It's full of mood and atmosphere. And then you get the back two songs that we've referred to already. Hide and Shade is the one that's most in line with like a Stranger Fruits. It's a traditional Zeal Ardor sounding song. And To My Ilk is the closing ballad, which, like I say, you've already got one on the album, and Are You the Only One Now? But I actually love this. It ends on this. It's maybe the only track on the entire album that is full of light and optimism. The rest isn't. So on that level, it's kind of cool that it closes. It'd also been a great opening track, but So like my first listen to, I found it very disjointed. By about listen 4, and certainly by listen 5, I'm kind of actually at the stage where I like the flow of it. But I like the flow of it as a collection of groups of songs that have definitive starts and definitive closes before they move on to the next phase of their sound. It's produced impeccably. The musicianship, it's not stretching anything. It's surprisingly minimal in parts, which I wasn't expecting. I was expecting in the past they've filled up every part of the sound. They don't do that. The blackened elements are approached much more savvily. That's a word. Specifically in the vocals are more blackened, but some of those blackened techniques are actually played clean on this album, which adds a depth that I'm just not used to. When we reviewed the Unprocessed album, we were talking about that. So was it Thrash, I think is the name of the song, and we were talking about how you would come up with that, and it was like that. I just played a speed thrash riff, but I just played it clean. Kind of feels like Zeal Ardor are doing the same approach here, where it's blackened elements just played clean and well produced. Love the texture that it adds. It's just something a little bit more kinetic and frenetic in the listen. Vocally, I don't think he goes overboard on anything, but he is settled into his voice so well. It's so confident. Those melodies are memorable as fuck. The collaboration of the backing vocals, excellent. Those gospel influences, I fucking love. And I'm kind of at the stage now where I think, when I first heard The Devil Is Fine, I was like, this band's going to be huge. They were never going to be huge with The Devil Is Fine. It's too niche. I'm now listening to this and I'm like, Zeal and Ardor are headlining a festival.
Mm.
You know what I mean? They could, with this sound, I think it is interesting. I think it's ambitious. I think it's going to piss off a shitload of their fans, which makes me love it even more. That 70s style kind of Bowie-esque rock stuff they brought in, it suits their sound so fucking well. I love it. I kind of got to the end of it thinking this is their most accomplished album. I think this is the best thing they've done. I still don't know if I would score it the highest score I've ever given a Zeal and Ardor album. To me, Stranger Fruits gets like 5 out of 5. I absolutely adore that. I don't know if I'm at a 5, but I'm like, it's like a fucking cunt hair off it. It's so close to it, and I think only time is going to be kind to further listens of this album from me. Just when you think you know, you don't know, and I kind of love that about it. I want more of that. I want more of the you think you've got the band pegged, and the release strategy, as bizarre as it is, gave a lot of the ground in. The only thing it didn't cover, and this is the last point I want to touch, is that 70s rock influence that's on the album is not touched in any of the singles. So if you are charting that way, and you probably shouldn't be charting it that way, but if you are charting it that way, it is very left field, and I think that's what put me off on my first listen. As much as I like those tracks, I was kind of like, you've 2 of them on this album.
Yeah.
And I'd never heard them before, and it just feels out of place. But on subsequent listens, their placement is actually great for me. It kind of breaks it up. So yeah, I talked long form. I did tell you I had a lot to say about it, but suffice to say, I love this album, and I will continue to sit back and no longer. I don't know why I even doubted it, but I think Zeal and Ardor are a band that are going to continue moving forward without any anchor. I think that's the beauty of it. I genuinely think there's anything that these guys can turn their hand to, they'd be really fucking good at it. So that's my thoughts. Now, you are not as big a Zeal and Ardor fan as I am, Dave.
No, I think you got me into them on Stranger Fruit. But that was the kind of album that I first heard them on. And even like the first time I heard that, I was like, I am not sure if this is for me, to be honest. That album has grown on me a lot, but I think it took me to hear the self-titled for me to go back and appreciate Stranger Fruit more. But yeah, I really enjoyed the last album as well. This is an interesting one because Zeal and Ardor have really always been one guy, really. Like Manuel has been the primary songwriter, he would usually write the material, then pass it on to the rest of the band to play live. This one is different in that Manuel is still the main writer, but this time the band are involved in the recording process, which is a first. So they're all on the album, as opposed to Manuel writing and recording everything himself. And I think that was decided by Manuel so that I think when it came to playing live, the band would feel much more comfortable with this material that they've been involved in, the kind of laying the material down and knowing the intricacies of it, which I think has helped, to be honest. I think there's more of a band feel on this one than maybe previous records where it maybe didn't feel quite like that. That aside, this also feels like a band that have explored new ideas in the songwriting. As we mentioned there, we'd heard 4 singles before we got the album in, all very different. And GREIF definitely feels like it has like a lot of the fundamental parts of the Zeal and Ardor sound, but also feels like a push into other areas of style and weirdness, because Zeal and Ardor, they've always had that weird streak. I mean, it wouldn't be Zeal and Ardor without that bit of quirkiness. This album has bits of everything, to be honest, like pop, metal, gospel, black metal, prog, rock, stoner, industrial. Like it throws kind of everything in here. There was actually quite a few moments on this album reminded me of, firstly, Queens of the Stone Age, which I wasn't completely expecting considering the singles we'd heard. Also bits of Mike Patton, Faith No More, or Tomahawk even as well. Even little tinges of like Tool in there at moments as well. And I have to admit, like merging so many styles in one album, and on many occasions, like on the same song, can be a tricky design to kind of execute, I suppose. But I think Manuel has always been pretty good at kind of balancing how much of each style to kind of use so that it doesn't become like kind of too messy. That being said, I didn't always think it completely gelled on this one for me. There were moments for me that just didn't flow as much as I hoped it would. And it kind of felt like a bunch of singles rather than an interconnected album. Because a lot of the tracks, like individually, I enjoyed. Most of the tracks had already been released, to be honest. But out with those, I really liked "Are You the One? Are You the Only One Now?" Which kind of brought back more of that like kind of post black metal kind of bitterness, but with a really like well complemented softer side as well. I still love like his fondness for the kind of gospel side of things, and it is nicely kind of scattered throughout the album. I thought adding that feel with more kind of like almost kind of like 80s type electronics on Go Home My Friend was a really cool mix. Although it did feel almost kind of interlude-y as well at the same time, rather than like a full-blown track. But as you said, there's 2 or 3 of those moments throughout the album. 369 comes with a kind of similar idea, again, very kind of gospel heavy. So it was good to hear that kind of connective tissue was there throughout the album. Disease, as I mentioned earlier, had a bit of a kind of Queens of a Stone Age thing going on, and the kind of rhythm and the character. It's quite simplistic, but with a kind of touch of something more kind of odd in the vocal delivery of the verses. Great chorus though. It had one of the bigger hooks of the album. Sugarcoat also has that kind of same feel with the kind of fuzz bass kind of driving it and some kind of desert rocky kind of character in the guitars. I loved the ending of Hide and Shade and To My Ilk. I thought those 2 tracks complemented each other really well. I think Hide and Shade gives you that classic Zeal Ardor, everything you know and love about the band, and then To My Ilk, which was the first single, and I wasn't really sure of initially when I heard it. It's like perfect, like a really soulful kind of intimate closer to the album. I thought it worked really well. Vocally on this release, I agree with what you said. I don't think he's really doing anything like that's wildly different here on GREIF, but I think the control that he has over his voice is really, really well done. Those big melodies on like Fend You Off sound absolutely like effortless to him. He really knows how to channel kind of soul into a track. And even on the tracks that didn't like completely win me over musically, his voice always kind of impresses me with the places that he takes it, regardless of whether he goes for something intimate, or full like raspy black metal. It always kind of holds your interest. So there was a lot here like that I liked individually on the album. As an album itself, it was a bit of a weird experience for me. It almost felt like he was kind of writing these songs depending on what kind of mood that he was in, that day. And I know I read somewhere that he was working on a movie soundtrack prior to writing the album, which was a soundtrack of all metal tracks. So it is possible that he's maybe came out of that feeling like he wanted to do something different, than they've done in the past. And I think he has done that on a lot of this. But for me, it didn't completely work as an album. It's almost like he didn't like decide what kind of album he wanted to make.
Yeah, that's why I think it definitely sounds like 3 movements.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? As opposed to an album. Like had these been released almost in the line with where I'd drawn them in my listening as 3 EPs, and then it became an album at the end, I could see the joins, so to speak.
Yeah. And that's cool. I think it works as separate little segments, possibly, but together it just felt a bit off to me. I just never clicked with it at all. And I gave it a good few listens. The first listen was just like, what the fuck is going on here? But then the more I listened to it, I thought, right, okay, I can start to hear like little bits of connective tissue. But overall, maybe this didn't fully gel for me. The performances from the band and Manuel, like, you can't be denied. I think they sound probably the most cohesive they've ever sounded. And I think the album does have a bunch of really standout tracks, but then there are tracks that have interesting ideas that maybe just don't fully develop into great songs and doesn't flow nearly as well as the previous album did for me. Production qualities are great. Like I love the sound of the album. I actually think this might be better produced than the self-titled. It has something that feels very natural about it. You know, it's quite a almost kind of live kind of feeling, but it has that studio polish to it at the same time. Love the drum tones that they got on the album. I thought tracks like Clawing Out, for example, sound really punchy in the drums. Guitar tone is very well matched to it as well. So yeah, some stuff I really liked, other things that just didn't quite work for me. Scores. What are we thinking for GREIF by Zeal Ardor? What you scoring this one?
So I'm giving it a 4.5. I think, given a little bit more time, I think this will become my favourite Zeal Ardor album.
Oh.
Overall, I think it's got all the building blocks of what I kind of want from the band, and it shows a ton of promise for where the band can take things next. And that, to me, overall, is kind of where I want to be with this band now. I think the songwriting and musicianship, just in general, is incredible. That we need to now be in a position where I want to see this band elevate up. And the only way they're going to elevate up is by elevating their sound. And I kind of like that they've done it in a way where it does sound hugely commercial, but it still has that bite in the background. And I don't think that'll ever go. This guy can write pop music. He's done it.
Yeah.
But the fact he's never really going to let that side of Zeal Ardor go away is kind of the exciting part. So it's a 4.5 for me.
Nice. Not as good as the self-titled for me. I think I'll probably cherry pick tracks from this one. But you know, even with its flaws, it's not a bad album for me at all. I think they've just maybe set the bar extremely high for themselves on previous releases. So like creating something better than Stranger Fruit or the self-titled was always going to be a bit of a challenge.
We need to get you out to see them live as well. Like I seen them intimate, and they're now playing much bigger venues. And their live show, where they could barely all fit on stage because he had 3 gospel singers in the background, and everyone else all like that, and Tuts, which is not a tiny stage. It sounded fucking huge. Then you can only imagine now it's going to sound fucking massive. So
they took some risks on this one. Didn't always pay off, but I applaud the effort they made on this one. Scoring wise, I'm gonna go 4 out of 5. I feel like I was close to a 3.5, but I feel like that's maybe just too harsh, to be honest, for this album. I think it's better than that, so I'm gonna go 4 out of 5 overall. Okay, so the new Zeal Ardor album, GREIF, it's out on August 23rd, self-released. Links below to the band, to the pre-order, and a track from the album as well that you can check out. Have a listen, see what you think. I'm happy to hear your thoughts and opinions on it. Once the album's out, let us know in the comments below. That is the review. Thank you for checking out. Much appreciated. We'll be back with another review very soon, but until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.